No one expected it. The courtroom at the federal courthouse in Manhattan fell completely silent when Janice Combs, 80, 3 years old, and the mother of Sean, Diddy Combs, was quietly brought to the witness stand. Up until that moment, Diddy had remained calm throughout the trial. But when he saw his mother take the stand, his posture stiffened. His lawyers looked at each other, clearly unsettled. The prosecutor sat up, sensing something big was about to happen. This was the turning point. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for reliable, in-depth coverage of major cases like this one. Back in the courtroom, no one had any idea that Diddy's own mother would be called to testify. The air was already thick with tension from the day's heated exchanges. All eyes were locked on Janice as she slowly made her way forward, step by step, until she reached the witness box. Then came the oath, and audible gasps followed. Even the judge looked surprised. There had been no heads up, no indication. Just Janice Combs, a woman who had stood by her son through fame, fortune, and scandal, now getting ready to testify. Until that point, Diddy had looked relaxed, chatting with his legal team and occasionally smiling at supporters in the room. But everything shifted the moment his mother appeared. Maybe it was the shock of seeing the person who always protected him now testifying for the prosecution. Maybe it was knowing she was about to speak openly. Maybe for the first time about who he really was. Whatever it was, the mask fell. Diddy stopped being the music mogul and became just a son, watching his mother prepare to tell the truth. And when Janice started talking, the courtroom wasn't ready. She spoke of private conversations, long-held concerns, and hard truths she could no longer ignore. Her words didn't just hurt Diddy's defense, they cut deep, exposing a painful truth. A mother finally facing who her son had become. That morning had started like any other in court. Reporters whispered, lawyers reviewed their notes, and the atmosphere buzzed quietly. But when the prosecutor said, "The United States calls Janice Combs," the room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Some thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a desperate move. But as Janice walked to the front, standing tall despite her age, eyes focused and steady, it became clear. This was very real. The judge looked surprised. Diddy, flipping through papers at the defense table, stopped cold. His face went pale. His hands froze. Janice took her seat without glancing at anyone, not even her son, who stared at her in shock and disbelief. "Mrs. Combs, thank you for being here today," the prosecutor said gently. "We understand how hard this must be." Janice nodded slightly. Calm and composed, she was ready to speak. Given the weight of the moment, it was remarkable the judge allowed it, but he did. And from that point on, the entire trial took a dramatic turn. Because what Janice Combs was about to share wasn't hearsay. It wasn't gossip from ex-employees or speculation from business partners. This was different. This was coming from the woman who raised Sean Combs, the woman who stood by him through all the highs and lows, the one person who knew him better than anyone. Diddy's lawyer quickly objected, arguing that private conversations between a mother and her adult son should remain confidential, and that her testimony would unfairly sway the jury. But the prosecutor pushed back, saying that there's no legal protection for private conversations when they involve possible criminal behavior. After a short sidebar, the judge ruled the testimony would stand. Janice could go on. You could hear a pin drop. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Even the courtroom sketch artists froze, pencils in midair. Diddy's family looked stunned. The prosecutor stayed still, careful not to show emotion. Janice adjusted her glasses and looked straight ahead. "I've been asked to speak about things I've seen and conversations I've had with my son over the years," she said clearly. "And I'm here today because I believe the truth matters even when it hurts." A wave of murmurs passed through the room. Diddy's lead attorney jumped to object again, but before he could speak, Diddy gently pulled on his sleeve, signaling him to sit down. It was as if he already knew what was coming, and was ready to face it. The prosecutor walked up slowly, speaking with calm respect. Double quotes. "Mrs. Combs, can you tell the court about your relationship with your son?" Janice took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her voice was calm but firm. "I raised Sean on my own after his father was murdered," she began. "He was just a little boy. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, so he could have a better life than I did. I wanted him to be strong, to succeed, to chase big dreams." She paused, a soft look crossing her face, and he did. He went beyond anything I could have imagined. From a young intern to a music mogul. From producing tracks to building an empire. He made it. He became a billionaire. Her voice carried a mixture of pride and pain. She spoke about the early days, his drive, his ambition, his charm. Sean was always persuasive. Even as a child, he could talk anyone into anything. He had that gift. And from there, her testimony continued calm, honest, and quietly devastating. A faint smile crossed Janice Combs's face, but it quickly faded. She turned slightly toward the jury. "Somewhere along the way, something changed," she said quietly. Success came quickly. Suddenly, everyone around him was saying yes. People wanted favors, opportunities to be near him. He started thinking the normal rules didn't apply to him anymore. Honestly, I think he started believing that. The prosecutor gently led her through her memories from the early 2000s when Diddy's career was on fire. Janice spoke carefully, describing how she began noticing subtle, then troubling changes in her son's behavior. How he became more controlling. How he would explode with anger if anyone pushed back. How he started ignoring personal boundaries. "At first I tried to explain it away," she said. "I told myself it was the stress. The music business is rough. He was managing so much, so fast. But then I started seeing things, hearing things." She paused, then continued. "When I visited his homes, there were moments that didn't feel right. Young women who seemed confused or scared. Staff who looked nervous. Places in the house I suddenly wasn't allowed to enter. And that was new. I had always been welcome. Everywhere before." She recalled one visit to Diddy's Miami home in 2008. "I showed up unannounced. Mothers do that," she said, drawing a few tense chuckles from the courtroom. There had been a party the night before. The house was being cleaned, but it didn't feel like a normal mess. Staff were going room to room collecting cell phones. One young woman was crying while a security guard walked her out. When Sean saw me, he was angry, furious. I hadn't called first. The prosecutor then presented a photo. "Do you recognize this place?" he asked. Janice looked at it carefully. "Yes," she said. "This is the pool house at Sean's loss. Angela's home. Around 2010, he turned it into a studio, or so he said, but he was very secretive about it. I wasn't allowed in, and that was strange. I'd always had access to every part of his homes before." Her voice grew stronger as she described how her unease deepened over the years, how she tried to confront her son. "I asked questions. It's what mothers do. But every time he brushed me off. He'd tell me I didn't understand his world, that everything was consensual, that this was just how things worked in the music industry." The prosecutor leaned in gently. "Did your son ever talk to you about the allegations made by women against him?" Janice nodded slowly. "Yes. When the first accusations came out around 2017, I called him right away. What mother wouldn't? I asked him directly if any of it was true. He told me they were lying, said it was all about money, that this kind of thing happened to every successful man in his business." She paused, clearly struggling with the memory. "I believed him. I wanted to believe him. It's my son." The prosecutor asked gently, "Did something happen to change that belief?" Janice took a deep breath. "Yes," she said softly. "In late 2023, after Cassie filed her lawsuit, I confronted him again. We were alone in his New York apartment." Janice said quietly, I told him I needed to hear the truth. Not what his lawyers told him to say, not what he told the media. Just the truth. From a son to his mother, you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. He looked different that day, tired. Like the act was wearing off, she continued. He didn't confess everything, but he said something I'll never forget. Her voice wavered slightly for the first time. He told me, "Mom, you don't build what I've built by playing by everyone else's rules. Sometimes people get hurt. That's business." She paused, clearly fighting emotion. "That's not how I raised him," she said, her voice breaking. "That's not business." "That's not right." Throughout her words, Diddy sat completely still, his gaze locked on the table in front of him. His lawyers kept scribbling notes, whispering among themselves, but Diddy seemed far away. Like the weight of his mother's words had taken him somewhere else entirely, Janice continued. She recalled how her fears deepened in early 2024, after surveillance footage surfaced showing Diddy assaulting Cassie in a hotel hallway. "I called him the moment I saw the video," she said. "Devastated doesn't even begin to describe it. I asked him, how could he do something like that?" He gave her the same line he'd used publicly, that it was a rough time in their relationship, that the video didn't show the full story, that he wasn't that person anymore. The prosecutor asked softly, "Did you believe him?" Janice didn't hesitate. "No," she said, "not anymore, because I'd seen that anger before with my own eyes, never directed at me, but at his staff, business partners. That man in the video wasn't a stranger to me." Realizing that TET shattered something inside me, she went on to describe how, during a visit to his home in early 2024, she found something chilling: notes in his office. Lists of women's names, each with comments written beside them. Handled. Potential problem. When I asked him what it was, he took the paper from my hands, she said. Told me it was just business. It's nothing I needed to worry about. She looked down for a moment, but the way he looked at me, I knew. A mother knows. Even when your child is grown, you can feel it when they're hiding something. Prosecutor approached again, holding up a new exhibit. Mrs. Combs. "I'm showing you what's been marked as Government Exhibit 42. Do you recognize this document?" She examined the paper, then nodded slowly. "Yes, these are my own notes," she said. "I started keeping them after that conversation. I began writing down everything I'd witnessed, things he told me, things that didn't sit right. I couldn't push it away anymore." "And why did you start keeping these notes?" the prosecutor asked. Janice took a breath. "'Cause I was afraid I was losing perspective. Okay? That my love for my son was blinding me to what was really going on. Writing it all down helped me see the truth. And what I saw terrified me." For the first time since she began speaking, Diddy looked up. His eyes met his mother's across the courtroom. The moment was short, but powerful. A silent exchange that seemed to carry years of emotion, heartbreak, betrayal, and something unspoken that neither one of them dared say out loud. Janice turned back to the prosecutor, ready to continue. The prosecutor stepped forward again, watching Janice Combs closely. Her posture had changed, stronger now, steadier. "Despite the weight of her words, I love my son," she began, her voice unwavering. "That will never change, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Too many people have been hurt." Taking a deep breath, she braced herself for what was coming next. "Mrs. Combs," the prosecutor said gently, "I want to ask you about a specific conversation you had with your son this past April after his arrest. But before this trial began, can you tell the court about that?" Janice nodded, her eyes focused ahead. "Yes, I went to see Sean at the detention center. They gave us a private room, probably because of who he is," she explained. "It was just the two of us." She paused before continuing. "I told him I needed to hear the truth. Not half-truths, not spin. The real story. I said, 'Sean, I love you with all my heart, but I have to know what I'm standing behind. I need the truth before I can support you publicly.'" The room. was silent, everyone hanging on her next words. He sat there for a long time. Then he finally said, "The truth. The truth is I built a world where I made the rules, where what I wanted happened. If people didn't go along, they got left behind or worse. Was it always right? No. Did people get hurt? Ma. That's how power works, Ma. That's how it's always worked." The judge leaned forward slightly. Jurors watched closely. Even the press seemed frozen in place. Janice's voice dropped slightly. "I asked him directly about the accusations, the parties, the drugs, the recordings, the threats. I needed to hear him deny it, to tell me it wasn't true." The prosecutor asked softly, "And did he deny it?" Janice shook her head. "No, he didn't. He said, 'It's complicated. Everything started out consensual. Nobody was forced. But once you're part of that world, the lines get messy. Sometimes people change their minds after the fact, but by then, they've already taken the money, the career boost.'" "They got what?" "They wanted." Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on her lap. "I told him consent, that's given under pressure. Through fear or when someone's intoxicated. That's not real consent." She swallowed hard, then added, "He looked me in the eye and said, 'That's not how it works in my world.'" Across the room, Diddy sat stone-faced. His attorneys looked visibly tense. One slid a handwritten note across the table, but he didn't touch it. His eyes stayed locked on his mother. Then came the final question. "Mrs. Combs." The prosecutor asked, "Did your son ever clearly admit to the crimes he's currently charged with?" "Not in so many words," Janice Combs answered quietly, "but he told me enough to understand the truth." She glanced at the jury and repeated what her son had said. "The system I built worked for years. Everyone got what they wanted. It only became a problem when people started changing the rules." Then she looked the jurors in the eye. "I raised my son to take responsibility, to own his actions. But when he said that, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. He wasn't seeing people as people anymore, as players in a game he thought he controlled." The prosecutor introduced a new piece of evidence, letter Janice had written too. Her son, after that visit. In it, she expressed her love for him, but also deep disappointment. She wrote that she could no longer defend choices she now saw as harmful and wrong. "Did you get a response to that letter?" Prosecutor asked. "Yes," Janice said. "Sean called me. He was angry at first, then almost desperate. Told me I didn't understand what was at stake his entire life, everything he had built. But I told him that was exactly why I had to tell the truth, because lives were at stake, not just his." Then came the big question. "Mrs. Combs," the prosecutor asked, "why did you agree to testify here today?" Janice took a long breath. "Because the truth matters. Because accountability matters. Because I raised Sean to be better than. This, and because real love a mother's love means helping your child face the consequences of their actions, not hiding them from it." She turned to look at her son this time, holding her gaze longer. "I'm here because I love my son, enough to speak the truth even when it hurts. I'm here because the women who were harmed deserve someone to acknowledge their pain. And I'm here because Sean needs to understand no amount of money, fame, or power puts you above basic human decency." As she said those words, Diddy's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders slumped. His calm, controlled expression fell away. For the first time since the trial began, he didn't look like a celebrity mogul. He looked like a son, coming face to face with the one judgment he couldn't escape, his mother's. The prosecutor thanked Mrs. Combs and returned to her seat. When the defense attorney stood for cross-examination, his tone was noticeably soft, almost respectful. He didn't try to discredit her or question her motives. Instead, he focused on the fact that Janice had not personally witnessed any of the alleged crime zone. That her testimony was based on conversations and observations over time. During cross-examination, Janice Combs stayed calm and composed. She admitted she hadn't personally witnessed the crimes her son was accused of, but she stood by her core message that her son had built a world where people were used, hurt, and discarded. And in private moments, he had confessed enough for her to know the truth. When the judge finally excused her from the witness stand, she didn't rush. She turned and looked directly at her son. They didn't speak, but in that silent exchange was a lifetime of love, heartbreak, and a mother's final hope that he might still find his way back from the darkness. Then she walked slowly past the defense table and out of the courtroom. Her steps were steady, her head held high. She left with dignity. Diddy watched her go, his face unreadable at first. But something in his eyes had changed. All the arguments, denials, and legal maneuvering of the past weeks hadn't shaken him. But this, his mother's words, cut through everything. No spotlight, no lawyer, no fame could shield him from that kind of truth. After she left, the prosecution called their next witness, Dr. Margaret Chen, an expert in family psychology, especially in cases involving high-profile or powerful individuals. Once she had introduced herself and her qualifications, the prosecutor asked, "Dr. Chen, can you help the court understand the significance of the testimony we just heard?" Dr. Chen nodded. "What we witnessed today was extraordinary," she began. "In cases involving celebrities or wealthy individuals, family members usually stay silent or stand by them no matter what. It's rare, incredibly rare, for a mother to speak out the way Mrs. Combs did." She continued from a psychological point of view. This shows what we call a moral tipping point. That's when the emotional weight of knowing something is wrong finally outweighs the instinct to protect someone you love. It's not a sudden change, it's a slow, painful awakening. Dr. Chen explained that Janice Combs's gradual shift from loyal supporter to truth teller made her testimony especially powerful. It showed the jury that this wasn't about revenge or public shame. It was about truth, she said, and the human cost of silence. Dr. Margaret Chen continued her expert testimony, helping the jury understand why Janice Combs's words carried such powerful weight. The prosecutor asked about the specific behaviors. Janice had described how her son brushed off her concerns, claimed it was just business, and acted like normal rules didn't apply to him. These are clear signs of what we call power insulation, Dr. Chen explained. When someone becomes incredibly famous, wealthy, and powerful, they're often surrounded are for everyone else. She emphasized that in many cases, a mother is one of the few people who can break through that bubble. Why? Because she knew him before the fame, before the fortune, before the walls went up. Dr. Chen then addressed Diddy's chilling words to his mother. That's how power works. She said this wasn't just a moment of arrogance. That line reveals a belief system, one that's been shaped and reinforced over many years by people who allowed or ignored harmful behavior because it benefited them. The prosecutor then displayed pages from Janice Combs's handwritten notes spanning from 2008 to 2024 on courtroom screens. Dr. Chen. The prosecutor asked, "What do you make of the changes in her observations over time?" Dr. Chen studied the timeline. "At first, Janice gave her son the benefit of the doubt," she said. She chalked up his anger, secrecy, and controlling behavior to stress or pressure. But as time went on, she stopped making excuses. She started seeing a pattern of manipulation, fear, and control. She explained how the early entries were full of confusion and concern, while the later entries were sharp, clear, and full of purpose. What's powerful here is the consistency, Dr. Chen noted. The behaviors didn't change, her understanding of them did. As she continued, Dr. Chen helped the court see just how valuable Janice's voice was in this case. "A mother sees what others can't," she said. Janice Combs wasn't fooled by the public image. She watched that image take shape, and eventually she realized that what was happening behind closed doors could no longer be ignored. Dr. Chen finished this portion of her testimony with a clear message. In my professional experience, when a parent, especially one who has long supported the accused, reaches a point where love no longer justifies silence, that is often the moment the truth finally breaks through. As Dr. Chen wrapped up her expert testimony, the entire courtroom remained still. Diddy sat motionless, a shadow of the confident man who had once walked in with a smirk and designer sunglasses. Now he looked small, quietly whispering to his lawyers at times, but mostly staring at the table, shoulders hunched. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by something heavier, grief, maybe, or guilt. When the defense finally stood to question Dr. Chen, their tone was cautious. They didn't attack her directly. Instead, they tried to argue that her analysis was based on general theories, not personal knowledge of the Combs family. Dr. Chen calmly acknowledged that she hadn't met the family, but she stood firm. The behavior patterns described by Mrs. Combs are strikingly consistent with what we know about power, denial, and the way some family systems protect harmful behavior for too long. By the time she stepped down, the emotional atmosphere in the room had completely changed. The jury, many of whom had remained poker-faced during graphic testimony earlier in the trial, now looked visibly moved. Some dabbed their eyes. Others scribbled notes with deep focus. It was clear Janice Combs's words had pierced the room like no other evidence had. When court resumed after a short break, the shift in tone was obvious. Sources close to the defense whispered that Diddy had been nearly unreachable during the recess. He wouldn't talk strategy, wouldn't even look at his lawyers. The prosecution, on the other hand, appeared energized, quietly discussing how best to follow the emotional high point of the morning. Then Judge Arun Subramanian returned to the bench and addressed both sides. In light of this morning's developments, do either of you wish to make any motions before we proceed? Diddy's lead defense attorney stood up slowly, then said something few expected at this stage of the weeks-long trial. Your Honor, the defense requests a brief continuance. We need time to confer with our client and reassess our position. Gasps rippled through the room. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a team to ask for a break so late in the trial. The prosecutor objected immediately, arguing that any delay would risk disrupting the jury's emotional focus and weaken the government's momentum. But after a long pause, Judge Subramanian nodded. Request granted. The court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Jurors, please remember not to discuss this case or consume any related media in the meantime. With that, court adjourned. Within minutes, headlines exploded across news outlets. A mother's words shake the Diddy trial to its core, Janice Combs breaks her silence, and possibly the defense legal experts across the networks weighed in. The verdict. Her testimony may have done what no prosecutor's evidence had fully accomplished. It broke through the image of a music mogul and revealed the deeply troubled man beneath. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. People had lined up before sunrise, hoping to witness what many were calling the most pivotal day of the trial. The energy was electric. Every seat was filled. Reporters, spectators, and legal analysts all sat forward in their chairs, waiting. When Judge Arun Subramanian entered and the jury took their seats, the usual routine was interrupted. Diddy's lead attorney rose. Your Honor, after considerable discussion with our client, we respectfully request that Mr. Combs be allowed to address the court. A wave of whispers rippled through the gallery. The prosecution quickly objected. Your Honor, any statement from the defendant must be made under oath and subject to cross-examination. This is not a press conference. Judge Subramanian nodded. Mr. Combs, if you wish to speak, you must do so from the witness stand under oath, and with full understanding that the prosecution will be permitted to cross-examine you. Do you understand? The entire courtroom turned toward Diddy. He stood slowly. Gone was the flash of the designer suit, the swagger, the practiced smirk. He looked stripped down, simple dark suit, shoulders slightly slumped, face unreadable. "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I understand and I agree." Gasps. Audible ones? Legal experts had almost unanimously predicted he wouldn't testify standard strategy in high-stakes criminal trials. The risk of self-incrimination is simply too great. But here he was, walking to the stand. Some thought it was strategy. Others saw it as something deeper, a reckoning. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat. His attorney approached gently. Double quotes, "Mr. Combs, why have you chosen to testify today?" Diddy took a breath, his eyes scanning the room before finally resting on the jury. His voice was softer than anyone had heard before. "Because I listened to my mother yesterday. Really listened. And for the first time in a long time, I saw myself through her eyes." He paused, swallowed. "I've been hiding behind money, behind lawyers, behind fame. So long that even I started to believe the lies I told myself." The room was silent. My mother raised me better than the man I became. She taught me about respect, about treating people right, about responsibility. Somewhere along the way, I forgot all that, started thinking the rules didn't apply to me. For a moment, even his attorney looked unsure of how to respond. "This wasn't just testimony, it was confession, Mr. Combs." The lawyer continued, more gently now. "Can you explain to the jury what you mean by that? What exactly are you admitting today?" Diddy looked directly at the jury. "I'm not going to pretend everything they've said about me is false. I won't insult your intelligence. I created a world around me, a machineware. I always came out on top, where my success mattered more than the people I hurt. And yes, people did get hurt." His voice broke slightly. "I told myself it was business, that people agreed to the terms, that no one was forced. But deep down, I knew. I knew fear can make people say yes. Okay. That power can make people feel like they have no choice. That's not consent. It's not respect. That's not right." The jury was transfixed. No one scribbled notes now. They were just watching. I thought I could fix this with payouts, with NDAs, with silence. But silence doesn't heal. Truth does. And I owe the truth to the people I hurt, and to the woman who gave me everything, my mother. At that, his voice fell to barely a whisper. "She looked at me yesterday and saw a stranger. I never wanted to be that man. But I became him, and I'm sorry." The attorney paused, then nodded. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge turned to the prosecutor. Cross-examination. The lead prosecutor stood slowly, but her tone, like the defense's, was not combative. It was firm, but measured, careful, not to shatter the raw vulnerability hanging in the room. The prosecutor stepped forward, her voice calm but unwavering. "Mr. Combs, you've described building a world where power, fear, and control shaped every interaction, where true consent was often impossible. Are you aware that what you just described meets the legal definitions of the crimes you are charged with? Coercion, racketeering, and sex trafficking?" Diddy didn't flinch. His voice, though quiet, carried clearly across the hushed courtroom. "Yes, I'm aware. I've had a lot of time to think since my arrest. It's time to actually read what the law says. Time to reflect on how my actions weren't just wrong, ... They were criminal." The prosecutor nodded slowly. "And yet, when this trial began, you pleaded not guilty. What changed?" Diddy's eyes shifted, searching, and then stopping on the empty front row seat where his mother had sat the day before. His voice cracked. "Yesterday changed everything." He paused. You could hear breathing in the courtroom, hearing my mother, someone who has always stood by me, say she couldn't anymore because of who I had become. It forced me to confront something I'd buried for years. Not the image I built, not the brand, but the man I actually am. A beat. I spent my whole life building walls, lawyers, contracts, money, silence. But my mother's words broke through all of it. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse, she just told the truth. and I realized it was time I did too. The prosecutor stepped forward again. So, to be absolutely clear, Mr. Combs, are you admitting guilt today? The room was still. The jury leaned forward. Diddy looked down for a moment, then back up. Yes, I am. I committed acts I now understand were criminal. I hurt people. I silenced them. I abused my power. And I cannot take that back. But I can stop lying about it. I can start owning it. A long silence followed. Then the prosecutor simply said, "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Subramanian looked at the defendant for a moment, as if measuring the gravity of what had just occurred. "Mr. Combs, you may step down." Diddy stood, hands slightly trembling, and walked back to the defense table. His gaze no longer defiant, no longer performative. He looked human as he sat. Murmurs rippled quietly through the courtroom. On the jury bench, some members wiped their eyes. Others wrote furiously. The confession had landed like a thunderclap, not shouted, but spoken with a weight no cross-examination could shake. A mother's love had done what the system could not. It made a man built on power finally tell the truth. My mother spoke the truth. The truth I had been denying for so long. Diddy's voice was low, stripped of performance. It broke something open in me. The last excuse I had, the one I clung to, was that the people who truly knew me, who loved me, understood that I wasn't the monster the prosecution was describing. But hearing my own mother say she couldn't defend me anymore, it took that away. There was nothing left to hide behind. The prosecutor didn't interrupt. She simply led him step by step through each element of the criminal charges: sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, coercion, and one by one, Diddy admitted his actions aligned with the definitions of the law. There was no spin, no deflection, just a man confronting the wreckage he'd caused. By the end of cross-examination, Diddy looked drained, like a man unraveling on the inside. When he stepped down from the stand, he paused, scanning the courtroom. Victims, journalists, curious onlookers, his family, and that now empty seat where his mother had sat. For a moment, it looked like he might say something more. But the moment passed. He returned to the defense table in silence, a silence heavier than any outburst. The judge called a recess. People filed out slowly, stunned. But Diddy remained seated, motionless, the weight of his own words pressing down. Like gravity. The man who had once built an empire from charm and ambition had just dismantled it himself with nothing but honesty. After the break, the courtroom was still settling when a quiet ripple of surprise moved through the room. Diddy's attorneys had requested a private conference with the prosecution and the judge. 30 minutes later, they returned. Judge Subramanian took the bench, face composed but voice deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I have been informed that the defendant wishes to change his plea." Gasps, audible whispers, all quickly silenced. "Before we proceed, I must confirm that this decision is being made knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily." The judge addressed Diddy directly. "Mr. Combs, do you understand the rights you're waiving by changing your plea to guilty?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Has anyone threatened or coerced you into this decision?" Diddy shook his head. "No, Your Honor. This is my decision, after hearing my mother's testimony. After finally accepting the truth of what I've done, I cannot, in good conscience, keep denying responsibility." The courtroom was completely still. The judge nodded solemnly. "Very well. The court accepts your change of plea." Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later as the proceedings ended. The victims who had testified, the ones who had carried their trauma through years of silence, stood quietly. Some clutched each other's hands, others wiped away tears. No one spoke. No one needed to. The trial that many believed would drag on for weeks had come to an unexpected end, not with a verdict, but with a confession. Not through legal maneuvering, but through a mother's voice. And a son surrendered to the truth he had long buried. Outside the courthouse, the world waited. Cameras clicked. Reporters swarmed. Microphones were thrust forward like weapons, demanding a reaction. And then, through the crowd emerged Janice Combs. Her posture was straight, her face calm, though grief clung to her eyes. She stepped up to the microphones not as a celebrity's mother, but as a mother who had just watched her son plead guilty to crimes that shook a nation. "Today is a difficult day," she began, voice steady, "but it's also a necessary one. I love my son. That will never change. That love without truth." She paused, searching for the right words. "Isn't really love at all." Her voice trembled for the first time. "I hope this is the beginning of healing for Sean, for the people he hurt, and for our family." She said no more. She didn't need to. And then she walked away, not shielding herself from the cameras, but not looking into them either. Inside. It was over. Sean Diddy Combs was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, no longer the icon in designer suits, flanked by bodyguards and lawyers. Just a man stripped of power, finally standing inside the truth. He didn't speak. He didn't resist. He didn't look like someone who had lost. He looked like someone who had stopped pretending that he disappeared down the corridor, heading for a jail cell instead of a private jet. The room remained hushed. Even Judge Subramanian, who had presided over countless high-profile cases, seemed to pause, momentarily unsure how to resume the ritual of legal process in the aftermath of such raw humanity. The jurors, dismissed without deliberation, left with tears in their eyes. Some had tried to maintain detachment, others never could, but all of them had felt something shift. And Diddy looked unburdened, not innocent, not forgiven, but unburdened of the lies he had lived under for so long. His legal team released a short statement. "Mr. Combs has accepted responsibility for his actions. He asks for privacy for his family during this difficult time and expresses deep remorse to those he has harmed." But Diddy himself said nothing. No post on social media. No exit interview. He went quietly into federal custody, where he would await sentencing, beyond the courthouse. The world erupted. The music industry, which had cautiously watched from the sidelines, issuing PR-friendly statements about respecting the legal process, was now in full retreat. Labels released condemnations. Internal investigations were launched. Projects were canceled. Contracts dissolved. Artists who had once called him a genius, a mentor, now distanced themselves. Some said they were shocked. Others admitted they'd heard the rumors, had heard whispers in the hallways of studios and green rooms, but never knew what to believe. Behind the scenes, panic spread. Executives gathered in emergency meetings. NDAs were revisited, settlements re-examined. Lawyers were on speed dial, because what Diddy had described on the stand wasn't just a personal downfall. It was a blueprint, a system, a culture, and now the internet was doing what it does best: digging, connecting, remembering. Old interviews resurfaced. Offhand comments from other stars, producers, insiders' comments that had once seemed cryptic were now chilling in hindsight. That's just how the industry works. You don't say no to power. He makes or breaks people. You play the game, or you don't play at all. Even footage from lavish industry parties, once glamorized, now looked sinister under the new lens of Diddy's confession. This was no longer just about one man. It was about an empire built on silence. And what happens when the silence is finally broken? The courtroom was silent, heavy, not the silence of boredom or formality, but the kind that filled a space after someone says the kind of truth you don't forget. Janice Combs sat in the front row, unmoving. She had watched this all unfold: the fall, the reckoning, the cracks in the image her son had built. And now she watched the sentencing, the final chapter of a story no mother ever dreams of witnessing. One by one, the victims rose. Their voices were clear, steady, sometimes trembling, but never uncertain. They spoke of what they'd lost: careers derailed, dreams shattered, confidence broken in ways that took years to rebuild, if ever. Some had been young artists, others assistants. One woman had only been 19. Each had thought they were stepping into opportunity, only to discover they'd been lured into a world where power was used as a weapon, and silence was the price of survival. A few looked directly at Diddy, others couldn't, but their words hit him like stone. Then it was his turn. Sean Combs' Diddy. Puff Daddy, a legend, rose from his seat in the defendant's chair, no longer cloaked in image or armor. "I want to apologize to everyone I've hurt through my actions," he began. "To the women who trusted me and whose trust I shattered. To the colleagues and employees I pulled into my web. To my children who will forever carry the weight of their father's legacy. And to my mother who taught me better." His voice didn't crack. It didn't rise. It simply carried the weight of what was finally real. "I can't undo the harm I've caused," he said. "I can only acknowledge it and accept whatever comes next." The judge spoke last. Judge Arun Subramanian didn't deliver his sentence like a punishment. He delivered it like a closing chapter, a legal necessity following a human tragedy. He acknowledged the courage of the victims, the unusual nature of Diddy's confession, and the systemic failure that allowed the abuse to go unchecked for so long. Then came the sentence. Decades. Enough to ensure accountability. Enough to send a message. As the words were spoken, some victims wept. Others held each other. Janice Combs simply closed her eyes. Outside, the world kept spinning, but nothing was quite the same. The music industry issued more statements. Some were sincere. Others sounded like PR bandages over deeper wounds. But a shift had begun. New policies, new safeguards, new conversations. People started looking at celebrity differently, not just as entertainment, but as responsibility. Fans? Once passive consumers now asked real questions. Who gets protected? Who gets silenced? And what do we enable when we look away? And as for Diddy, he went into federal custody not as a mogul, but as a man. A man who once believed he was untouchable. A man who finally spoke the truth too late to save his empire, but perhaps just in time to save his soul. Because in the end, it wasn't the prosecutors, the press, or the court of public opinion that broke him. It was his mother, telling the truth he could no longer deny.